Welcome back to the show, guys. This week I'm going to dive into 5 scouting tips that I wish I'd have known when I was younger. Cool thing is you can find these anywhere in the country.
You know, Owen is one of those guys that takes every detail into account, and today that is kind of our goal, is to branch out onto some new areas here on this public land and just try to find some of those little details that might put us in the game. I cannot put into words how excited I am. Lots of great bucks.
Alright guys, today we're going to get into some scouting tips. Hopefully will help you this fall bag a big buck. Before we get to that, we've got a couple updates for you. I want to go over the name the 6x5. There was a bunch of good names in there. I had about 10 of them picked out, and then one of them hit me. We got the one that said name him Genesis because I had those sheds laid out on the table there. When I had looked up a scripture, Genesis 27:3, I didn't know what that scripture was, and I thought that was so cool. I left my Bible open to that. If you don't know that verse, it'd be pretty cool to check it out. But anyway, one of the guys suggested to name him Genesis. If the good Lord's willing, you'll kill that buck, and that just rang true to me. That hit me in the heart. So I think I'm going to go with Genesis on the 6x5. So we're going to name him Genesis after that Bible verse. So if that was your comment, your name, reach out to me on Facebook, leave me your address and how to get a hold of you and all that, and we'll get that sweatshirt out to you, or hat, whichever you prefer. So the other thing is the enforcer on the shed hunt. We did, I believe, find the enforcer dead, and he had shed. So both things that I thought maybe had happened to him, either he was dead or he'd shed early. He's got great big old bases on him. We'll show you. Left side, it was all wonky last year. It's just a great big base, and so I do believe that's him. I imagine he just rutted really hard and couldn't make her through the winter. But in regards to the 6x5, I did finish that crossing down there. Remember we talked about putting that culvert in so I had better farm access. I did get that done, so we'll show you some of that as well. Going forward, we're going to talk about some of these scouting tips. Now Gavin is out doing that very thing right now. He's out doing some winter scouting, and I recommend the best time to do that is right now or right after winter, you know, late winter. All that sign is laid out like a puzzle. I mean, you just go put the pieces to the puzzle together. The scrapes are super obvious. The rubs, trails and everything are beat down at that time. So he gives you an idea where they were all fall when it comes to scrapes and rubs. You know, that stuff's perennial most of the time, year to year to year. And I know where these scrapes are, like on my farm. I know where the perennial scrapes are. So you get a chance to kind of start learning that stuff year one. So where I start is on a map. I can pick my funnels in a lot of good areas just off a map without even stepping foot on the ground. So one of the things I start with is water. I'm going to show you a spot right here. This is a spot that I've been to before, probably 20 years ago, and I still remember it's there. But anytime I've been around creeks, like good sized creeks and rivers, there always seems to be really good wildlife around those, whether it's deer, turkey, squirrels, whatever. But there's good wildlife around water, and there's usually cover on these waterways, you know, because of the erosion issue and stuff. So there's usually cover, a good travel corridor. So that's one of the reasons I start there. I want to show you one funnel that I've picked out here. We've got a lake. This is in Iowa. A lot of this stuff you'll be able to find anywhere in the country, whether you're hunting Michigan, out in Kansas, Iowa. This one in particular, you've got a lake right here, and by nature they're going to go around the end of the lake, right? If you got cover on both sides of it, they can swim across it, and I've seen plenty of deer swim, but most of the time they're going to go around the end of that. So look right here. Someplace here you're going to have a great funnel on the end of this. You get in here and look at this, you're going to find a spot where you can set up and cover 3, 4, 5 trails coming around the end of that. So the basis for all of this, for me, is just upping your odds. That's, you know, you try to get to a point where you just keep upping your odds a little bit more. Each little thing you do, you know, put the work in. eventually a lot less of it's luck and a lot more of it is you just putting your work in, you know, upping your odds. So you've got a spot right there. If we scroll down here, look at this spot right here. You've got water here, and it looks like either some backwater or maybe a pond here. And so I would say right between those two spots is another great place to set up. If you got a good tree, another good takeaway for water that I really love is you can blow your wind across the water and have a good wind direction to hunt that on where it's almost foolproof. Now, when you get these spots picked out, I'm still going to go put boots on the ground and verify that that's what I'm seeing on the map, you know. If you didn't have a chance to do that, say you're hunting public, you're going to take a trip out west to Kansas or something, you didn't have a chance to do that ahead of time, maybe you identify 10 of these spots. When you get there, you go start looking at them, maybe you look at 2 or 3 and they're as good as you thought they were, or maybe they're better, and then you can stop right there, you got a great spot to hunt, or maybe 2 or 3 on different wind directions. But if you identify, let's say 10 of them, and 2 of them you get there and they weren't like what you hoped, they're a little bit different in person, you know, you've got other options. So I start right there with water. Same thing with creeks. I'll see if I can find you a creek here, give you a couple of examples of good spots you'd set up on a creek. All right, I've got you a creek here picked out, and I love, like I said earlier, I love hunting spots like this. There always seems to be wildlife, but look at some of the funnels you can find in these creeks. I love outside bends of a creek. You've got just such a thing right here with cover going around that outside bend. So, you know, naturally the deer are gonna skirt that. I mean, I'm sure there's places they can cross these creeks, and they do cross them, but again, we're trying to up our odds. So a lot of deer are just gonna skirt the edge of that outside bend, like right through here. It looks like maybe there's a house or something there. And this is just a random spot. I just pulled this up on a map, and I have no idea where this is, but you got the same thing down here. So if I'm hunting in the morning, I'm going to hunt on this side. You try and get these bucks cruising looking for does. Maybe it's during the rut, you're on your hunting trip in November, and we want to be on the cover side. Now if I was hunting in the evening, I was hunting this food source, now I might be on this outside bend right here. So anything that's using this cove or this tillable, they want to go from one side to the other, they're probably not going to cross this creek twice to get over here. They're probably going to walk around the end of that creek. So just the kind of funnels I look for, and that's why I start with water, because they're pretty obvious. And you can pick out where you would likely have a creek crossing based on these too. So take a bend like this right here, where that water runs the outside of that bend, that's going to be eroded real steep. But the inside of this is not going to be as steep. That's going to be more gradual. So they can walk down the inside of this, and then it's just finding which side is more gradual that they cross to. They're probably not going to cross straight across to it. Like I said, this is all going to be eroded, real steep bank. But if you go where the water hits that edge, cuts and erodes that, and then bounces around this, it's probably going to be gradual right here. So I would surmise that there is a crossing going from this little point right here across like this, probably a creek crossing right there. So you can pick all that stuff on a map and know before you even get there where these likely spots are. Another thing you can check out, if we go to layers, you want to find food sources. Of course, you've got your tillable here. You know those are all potential food sources. Who knows what's planted there on a given year. But let's say it's all forested where you're hunting. Okay, let's look at acorn producing oaks. And there's a level for that here on Onyx. See what it just did right there? It's showing me where all these oak trees are that are producing acorns. If you hover over it, it'll show you what, these are white oaks primarily. White oaks, white oaks. So now you just gained access to another food source without even being there. You know where these oak flats are. You know, early in the year, there's probably going to be bucks feeding there. Especially where there's cover like this, they're going to stage up, feeding on these acorns, then feed out into the tillable later in the evening, most likely. You know, during the rut, maybe it's more sporadic, chaotic, but early in the year, that'd be a good way to look at that. This is your food source before dark, and maybe they're feeding in this after dark. So just another thing to look at. All right, second on my list is going to be the aerial map after water. You know, you're looking at water on probably on an aerial. You can also do a hybrid map where it's aerial, topographical in one map, which is pretty cool as well. I use that a lot. But if you want simplicity, you just want to look at an aerial, you don't know what the topography looks like, this is a great start. And look at some of these funnels you can pick out. Like right here, for instance, you got, looks like a little drainage or a creek runs through here. Look how thin that is. You could set up, you know, maybe have a little food plot in this little corner here, but you're set up in this cover where anything traveling either side of that, you could shoot either side of that. So that's a lot of stuff I do with these aerials. Try to pick your funnels. Connectors are going to be one of my big go-tos. You know, I said water's a big one that I go to, but these connectors are probably some of the best rut spots there are. Not all are created equal, so if you got a lot of cover on one end, a lot of cover on the other with a connector in between, those are the best ones. You know, where some of them, it might be a good looking connector, but it doesn't really connect anything good, they're not going to be as good. So here's one. It'd be nice if it was just a little bit thinner connector, but look at all this cover in through here, tons of cover, and then this cover extends through here into more cover to the west. So I would consider this to be a pretty good connector right here, even though maybe you couldn't cover the whole thing with a bow. Might be wider than, you know, 50, 60 yards, but it looks pretty darn good to me. I mean, it's open on both sides. You know, depending on when you get in there and look at the trails, you might be able to cover all of them from one bow stand. So it'd be something like this I would definitely look at. And of course, you know, where I've killed Wolverine, that's another good example of a connector. It's a creek bottom right there that connects a lot of cover to the west and a lot of cover to the east, and it's one of the best spots on my farm. So that's another area I go to, is aerials, to pick out your funnels. Now the third one I go to is topographical. And this probably takes a little bit of practice to really get to know what you're looking at, but I've done it for so long I can pretty much just take a glance at it and know exactly what I'm looking at. So let's switch over to topo here. There we go. Okay, let's see what we can pick out. We're going to have to zoom in a little bit. Here's your ridge tops, hill going down. Here's a cut going up, like a draw or ravine is what that is. Another one here. This even has shading too, so really complex map. Pretty awesome. Let's see if we can pick out a good funnel here. Here's a long running ridge right here. So if you wanted to hunt on top of a ridge during the rut and try and catch them cruising on the downwind side of the ridge, here's your ridge. Now you can see these points coming off that ridge. Now those are going to be hot spots for bedding. You know, they're going to be on the downwind side most of the time. So if you've got a northwest wind, this point coming off that ridge should be a hot spot for bedding on that particular day. Now if it switches to a southwest wind, then I would want to look at this spot over here on that day. That's going to be the better bedding spot. And they typically like to lay in a little kind of a flat spot. They don't want it too steep. So sometimes they'll lay on a steep hillside, but there's a little nuance where it flattens out, or a little hump or something they'll lay on. So keep that in mind as well. If it's super steep, like right in here, if there's not like a little hump or something where they're going to lay, it's kind of flat, they don't want to lay where they're about sliding down the hill, so they're probably not going to bed right in here where it's that steep. That's why these points, we always talk about the points coming off these draws are so popular. You got one there, one here. So you got a bunch of them here. A lot of different options you could hunt on different wind directions. All right, here's one that's a saddle. You can see right here's your high point. There's a trail going through in a road, so that's fine in this case. Another trail going through here. But here's a high point. Here's a high point. So you know this area right through here is lower. Now it'd be nice if these were closer together. If you had these almost touching, that would be a saddle that I would definitely hunt. This one's a little more widespread. I don't know if you could cover the whole thing or not with a bow, but this is what you're looking for. High spot, lower in the middle. And so, you know, these deer probably come up this draw, use this low spot, cross over to this low spot, maybe down into this drainage, or maybe they bed over here, something like that. But there again, it's just another funnel where you're trying to up your odds. What can we do? What spots can we pick that's just a little higher percentage spot than just picking any random spot? You look at those. Let's see if we can do the hybrid. You can see what the aerial and the topo looks like. So awesome map here. You can look at both Cover, and Topographical in one map. Now it can get a little confusing, so if you got a spot picked out that you really want to look at, then maybe you go to just Topo or just Aerial to see a little more detail on that particular map what you're looking at. But awesome tool, and this is the way I start all of my hunting. You know, whether it's a trip or a new farm I bought or whatever, I start all of my access, my tree stand spots, you know, my hot spot funnels, they all start right here on a map. And I've got buddies and I have sent these back and forth to each other for years. They're like, okay, I want you to design this property with the funnels in mind. Where would you put the food? And we'll send these back and forth. Okay, what would you do? This is what I would have done, and this is what you would have done. And you take, you know, both of those ideas and you kind of look like, okay, he had a good idea there. I like that. Let's implement that. And, you know, maybe I like my idea on something else. And so by doing that and just practicing this, you guys will get a knack for really picking the best spot. And that's what I've done really well. Basically, my whole hunting career is just picking the right spot, which comes down to that a lot of times. All right, so now you guys get all this picked out. You did your homework on your aerials, your topos, you looked at the water. Now the next thing to do is get boots on the ground. Like I said, that's what Gavin's doing right now. But get out there and make sure it looks like what you think it looks like on the aerial or the topo. Most of the time it does, but sometimes you'll get in there and there's just a little nuance you couldn't see on a map that either makes it better or maybe it makes it worse. So I would go out and verify all this if you can. Now, if it's a out-of-state hunt and you don't have a chance, that's why I said, you know, take your 10 spots, have 10 picked out, and then, you know, you've got different options, of course. Now, for my best tip of all, my last tip, here it is. There are no shortcuts. Everybody wants the secret sauce. What's the secret? There really are no shortcuts. You know, I've said for a long time, the harder you work, the luckier you get, you know, because everybody always say, oh, you're so lucky. You get so lucky all the time. How do you always get a good deer? It's no different than anything in life. The harder you work at it, the better you're going to be at it, and deer hunting is the same way. All right, well, that was the best tip I could give you right there, that last one. Now let's run over and join Gavin as he's doing this very thing, doing some scouting, and he's had a ton of big buck encounters on public land. So let's join him and see what he's got going on and see if he can put any of these strategies to use, and maybe he'll be successful this fall. Let's hope. Come on, Gavin.
Well, I hope you guys have been enjoying the show so far. As you know, Owen is just a total wealth of knowledge, whether you're talking about archery tips, hunting tips, habitat management, all of the above. And it's just a pleasure to be able to learn from him, not only from editing his footage, but also just being a good friend of his. And I'm very grateful for that relationship. You know, Owen is one of those guys that takes every detail into account, and today that is kind of our goal, is to branch out onto some new areas here on this public land and just try to find some of those little details that might put us in the game coming into next fall. And speaking of next fall, I cannot put into words how excited I am. Lots of great bucks. You know, last year I primarily was filming with Mike, and that in and of itself was an awesome experience, getting to learn from him just like Owen. You know, we were able to get out here a couple times and do some hunting, and particularly this area that we're standing in right now. I had a camera that I set up late September. There's some oaks that were clearly very active, a scrape right there, and the camera speaks for itself. You can see that there's tons of different bucks, tons of deer activity in general using that area. And one buck in particular called Inside Points that I had a little bit of history with from 2022, I believe. He was showing up in here, made a couple hunts here on the ground right off to my right, and sure enough, we had him come out right here behind me at 20 yards and just had this epic, 5-minute stare down with him. He was trying to figure us out. Couldn't, of course, get him killed. No footage of him. Lots of lessons learned from that. But another deer that was very active on this same exact spot was this buck I've referred to in the past as Broken 4. We encountered him one time in 2023, and he turned into a world-class buck last year, and I am extremely excited for him this year. I know that he, along with another deer that you guys have probably heard me talk about in the past called the Bladed 8, both of those guys made it through the season. What we're doing today is essentially a lot of these deer were coming from some main bedding back behind me, and coming out this way. And so I have never stepped foot in any of this back behind me here. And so what I've done up to this point, marked some areas of interest on onX. What I like to do is mark potential areas, really pick apart the map at home and just think about spots that might be good for a tree stand setup. Maybe it's a good area of edge. Maybe I think there might be some oaks there, whatever, and mark those areas of interest. Who knows what it's actually gonna look like, but that's why we're out here today, is to try to confirm or deny what those spots look like. Areas, again, that I've never been in before. You know, out here, lots of trees that either have too many branches, they're leaning. You can't obviously cut branches on here, so you're very limited. And that's, you know, going to the latitude saddles that I've used quite a bit last year between filming and hunting a little bit. That's where those things shine. And so we'll be thinking about how we can set up with the saddle setup in mind. And again, I'm just super excited to get walking here. So we'll see what we can find here today. I like this right here. Good trail going across. So this is one of those things that I've kind of identified in the office, you know, looking at onX. You can basically see there's this row of cottonwoods that we've followed back here. And back behind Rye here, you can see this big willow thicket. So row of cottonwoods broken up by the willows. It's a pretty obvious area of edge. And that's one thing that is a huge point of interest for me that I always look for. So back over my shoulder, I can see this little clump of cottonwoods. You know, cottonwoods, generally speaking, aren't great because they do not hold leaves very late into the season and they have no branches for cover. But you can see right here, I love this because it's a clump of trees. There's a lot to hide behind, especially when you're talking about getting in a latitude saddle where you're not so much off the front of the tree like in a, you know, normal hang-on set, but kind of off the back side of the tree, kind of hidden back in that cluster of trees. I think this could work out really nicely. The one thing I'm not sure about for this spot is access. You hear Owen talk about that all the time. Access is a huge thing that you need to take account of, something that I did not pay attention to much when I was younger, and it bites you in the butt. We do have the river back here a little ways, and so my hope is that, you know, in conjunction with those water feather boats, that we'll be able to slip up in here, slip in through the backside, again, especially on a morning type hunt, expecting deer to be coming back into bed from the ag fields. And this might be just kind of a little hub where they like to travel through. It's kind of a nice clearing. There's this wall of willows back behind us. And I think this could be a good little in-between going back to bed. So I like this spot. So just going through the normal process of marking these spots on onX. It's obviously a very helpful tool just to get around, and especially in an area that we're unfamiliar with. Awesome for that. But one thing I like to do whenever I mark my pin is go ahead and add a photo as well as any sort of notes. You know, just this clump of cottonwood trees you can see right here. But I love the photo specifically for just being able to see that spot, especially when you're coming in the dark and you're not very familiar with an area. We're back in the middle of nowhere, and definitely a great feature that I would highly suggest you check out. We're gonna get on to the next spot, kind of keep looping around this thicket here and see what else we can get into. Boy, I don't know. I wonder what this stuff is. We just walked through this whole thicket, just monotonous. Definitely probably some deer bedding in there, but came along the edge of this, and all of a sudden there's trails coming right through here. The edge is something that I really key in on. I mean, especially when you're talking about rut spots, but even just travel spots in general. Like I know that there's some oaks back behind to my left there. You know, it could be a good little spot. Might be worth, at the very least, putting a camera here, seeing if there's much movement going through here.
What are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking that
public land wizard stuff here.
I'm thinking that this would be a cool spot. Right behind Rye, there's a big trail that cruises the edge of this water, but this tree is not exactly one that'd be easy to get into, so it's like the only option is to hunt this on the ground. But for a north wind to blow over this pond, I mean, it would be absolutely bulletproof. We were just talking about calling scenarios. I mean, it would just be awesome, let alone cruising. Man.
Sometimes you gotta think outside the box.
After last year with old inside points, I'm just very averse to sitting on the ground now. It's just so hard to make it come together, especially with a cameraman, you know. But it would be sweet. I mean, it would be a in your grill type of hunt.
Imagine just east sunlight lighting the deer up in the morning on this, steam rolling out of his nose.
And they wouldn't be far from where you're at right now.
Recurve setup.
Dude, seriously.
See, this is when you know you're a good cameraman, when you get the subject to film himself.
Appreciate you coming out, Rye. Might be SOL on this one. It's just an example of, like, especially in this river bottom stuff, trees that are good and clean and easy to climb are hard to come by. We went through all those cottonwoods, and that's about the only tree species that, like, you know, always fits that bill. It's just a telephone pole, but not always. This is a good spot, but there's just not always somewhere to set up, unfortunately. You know, we've been doing quite a bit of walking around today. I mean, it really is a beautiful area. It's awesome that, you know, we have these public lands afforded to us. I couldn't be more grateful just to be able to walk out on this ground, let alone hunt it, have the opportunity at great deer nonetheless. We'll definitely be doing some more scouting here coming up. This is my favorite time to scout, being able to see what this is like, very similar to how it is in the fall. See those trails, see those scrapes and rubs before it greens up and kind of covers all this stuff up. So even though we've been walking around doing a bunch of talking and looking at stuff, I still think that we've kind of come back, circled back to this original spot. I think that this is going to be the one to really get a good crack at this buck. Going forward though, we've got lots more scouting ahead of us. Really only picked apart this little spot here, multiple other areas that I want to hit, and especially some areas that might put me in the game on other deer, such as that bladed 8. You know, he's going to be at the very top of the list. Huge buck, blew up last year. Very excited, like I said, for the 2025 season. It cannot come soon enough. It's only March here, but appreciate you joining. Hope you were able to take some stuff away. If nothing else, get some ideas from this. Appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you on the next show.